So thank you, Paulius. Thank you, everybody who joined. This is a very exciting topic of our time as doctors, as primary care doctors, as med students, some people are, as innovators in this space. And I wanted to provide a little context of where I'm coming from, because I think that'll be interesting for the discussion to come to. So I am formerly an academic physician, like probably a lot of you. I spent over a decade at Stanford, where I was a baby academic oncologist in training, and I saw the full gamut. I was a diehard evidence-based doctor to be, and then I ended up coming to the East Coast. I was at Columbia for a literal hot second when I was in oncology fellowship, and that was when things really just hit the fan, and I realized none of my mentors were happy. It was the saddest outcome of a very, very tough, over a decade-long journey. And I turned to digital health. I became a founder. So I've been on the founder path for about 5 years, give or take now. I've seen each and every part of digital and non-digital health tech innovation. You name it. I've looked at or tried different business models from every single angle and made so many mistakes. So I have a lot of experience, background, pains, and wonderful stories. And even after all of that, I've been through a full-fledged founding of a company called Curio, raised money, brought on co-founders, built a team, went through layoffs, wound down the company. And yet it was such a wonderful journey that I am starting anew. So that's a little bit of insight into my crazy mind and how my brain works. And none of the founder journey was ever as hard or burnout inducing as many parts of medical training. So if you are somewhere in the thick of it, know that you too could be a founder, and we need more physician founders. So I started a poll and I asked Paulius to send it in the chat. Thank you so much for people who have answered. So the questions for those of you who are listening in are: 1, I believe in evidence-based medicine, yes or no? 2, I believe most doctors in the US practice evidence-based medicine. And 3, I am comfortable sending a loved one to get care at most US healthcare centers. So a bit loaded and a bit leading, but I'm seeing that everybody believes in evidence-based medicine so far who've answered. And number 2, bit mixed. I would say about half and half folks believe that most doctors in the US practice evidence-based medicine. And almost, I think across the board, no one's comfortable sending a loved one to a US. Okay, what we've got, Matt. Matt is happy to send a loved one to a US healthcare center. So, and Polly is wonderful. I have to admit, I am not comfortable having done it. So you two are very brave souls indeed. So, and the reason I ask those questions is because longevity medicine very much is born out of evidence-based medicine. I think there's a lot of crazy hype right now. There's a lot of slick marketing, and that's off-putting to a lot of us who come from a more traditional, like, academic background. Like, we believe in, following the data. Marketing feels kind of sleazy. So I totally get that. And longevity medicine right now is in a phase where it's going through this almost VC startupification, and it's not very comfortable or familiar to many of us who come from the more conventional evidence-based medicine world. But it is very related, and I'm happy to talk about that throughout this chat and discussion and afterwards. And then the piece about, do American doctors actually practice evidence-based medicine? I think I agree with many of you who say no, or maybe, or they're trying. The problem, as you all know, is that corporate medicine forces us into ever shorter visits. It's become sort of algorithmic care. It's really hard to do personalized evidence-based medicine for everybody. It's actually impossible, I think. Even with a lot of time and a lot of cash, it's already really hard and it's near impossible in a traditional conventional setting. Um, and then I'm just going to leave that last question about whether we're comfortable with the US healthcare system for our loved ones. I think it's a mixed bag. It's a tough one, but the results with people saying no, they're not comfortable, that is the same sentiment of a lot of folks who are turning to longevity medicine. Longevity medicine is kind of being seen as this new version of better care, and people want better care for themselves and their loved ones, and that's really at the core of longevity medicine, even more than some seeking of immortality, which I know longevity kind of has that feel to it, but I think it's more about wanting better care than it is about something that is impossible to achieve. So, all right. So I am So to start off with, there's undoubtedly a huge craze going on right now. This was just like one random market review by some firm. There's a gazillion of them. There's every single VC firm is trying to bet on longevity because, honestly, I heard the argument, and I think this is true. It's kind of practical that the longer people live, the more they buy. So it's good for the economy. So, and I wrote about this in one of my thought pieces, but it's true. Longevity medicine is all about consumerism. And I kind of feel icky about that too. And I'm sure a lot of people do as well. But that's why there's so much backing behind it. Like everybody wants to make money. Investors want to make money, business owners want to make money. Honestly, probably any of you and us, like doctors, also wish that we were being paid more for what is honestly quite hard work. So that is why there is so much consumerism in this field of longevity, because there's this reason to pay for all these tests. There's a reason to get all this data, and that is all in seeking health span and longevity. And I also think that the timing makes a lot of sense. Yes, there's a bit of timing because a lot of longevity biotech companies were funded about 5 to 10 years ago. So if you follow like biotech, usually it's about when they hit like phase 2 or so, that a bunch of more care delivery companies start cropping up. So timing kind of makes sense wise. I'm also speaking from experience, having founded a company. Curio used to be in the psychedelic space. And so there's many parallels between that cycle to the longevity cycle. Also, because we came from the depressing era of COVID not so long ago, I think people are just sick of it. They don't want to hear about sickness and being ill and saving people in the ICU. People are looking towards the future and trying to be a bit more optimistic. So it's a little bit of selling hope. I saw, one of the questions was like, how much of this is just selling hope? And a lot of it is, honestly. And I don't necessarily believe that that's all bad. You need to give people an element of hope for them to work towards something. Otherwise, if you tell them like, there's nothing you can do to achieve better health, no one's going to buy into a system that tells them that. So, and then this is a snapshot of the Longevity Docs Mastermind, which happened here in New York City a couple of months back. It's one of several like doctor communities that are focused. It's kind of like XPC, but full of longevity docs. It's a really interesting crowd. And yeah, and I'm sure there's, I don't know, maybe I'm the only one who overlaps in the two groups right now, but it's a lot of concierge medicine folks. A lot of people from the precision functional medicine space have adapted into or evolved into the longevity space. There's a mix of people who are a bit more academic and a bit of people who are a bit more like med spa-ish, for lack of a better way of phrasing it. Some folks have definitely made it big in terms of launching businesses that are like hyperbaric oxygen chamber clinics or things like that, IV clinics for different drips, NAD plus drips or things like that. And so it's a really, really mixed bag. The entire field, the entire specialty is still struggling to define itself. And I think that's really healthy for something that is new. So here, I've been thinking a lot about defining it as like what is longevity medicine? And it really is this evolution of adopting wellness and health focus into medicine in general, and then adding a bunch of data. I put this comparison of the two Goop logos because that was Goop's logo 10 years ago, and this is Goop's logo on the bottom now. The 10 years ago one is much more traditionally feminine. It's like soft muted colors. And the current one is black and white. It's really bold. And that's the marketing and branding of every single longevity type company out there, from supplements to wearables and everything else. There's this athleticism that's been injected into healthcare that is very characteristic of longevity medicine. People are intense in longevity medicine. People like, and this is something I'm writing about now. What is the difference between something like functional medicine and something like longevity medicine? Some of it is purely attitude. Like they both care about similar things. There's all this incorporation of the same kind of testing, even as functional medicine and precision medicine. But longevity medicine has this culture of intensifying everything from the consumerism to the testing to the data to fitness. Like people are exercising harder. They're getting more neurotic about their diet regimens. They're fasting longer. They're taking more drugs. They're doing more intervention. So there's this definite like interventional attitude towards longevity medicine that's a bit different than prior flavors like functional and precision medicine. So I think the key players in this field are, these are just some. There's a lot more, but I chose to focus on these because I feel like these brands are probably most relevant to us as clinicians. There's a gazillion more biotech-oriented brands, and there's a bunch of companies that are smaller or have already failed, even though it's still early in the cycle. I've met many of the founders of these companies, especially of the clinical platforms at this point, and it's so interesting. Like, and I'll save it for maybe offline, like what I think will help a company succeed, like knowing what I know as a founder who has done something in the scaled up telemedical or clinical space. And knowing that the costs of all the things being offered is quite high. And I have certain hesitations, but also certain beliefs about what might stick longer term in terms of all of these innovations. So, but I'd love to hear, in the chat, maybe if people are curious about questions about any of these in particular, or if there's other brands that have come up that people are curious about. I've been digging into a lot of these, so happy to discuss. Modern Age, just to quickly answer that, shut down. And I met the founder, or the chief medical officer rather, of Modern Age, really great guy, very knowledgeable. And they actually, I believe, I don't know the full story, but I had patients come to me after Modern Age shut down mostly for weight management, actually. And it's because a lot of these longevity platforms do a lot of the same kind of care that all of you and I do, which is like, primary care. They do a lot of the weight management stuff. They do a lot of the hair loss stuff, erectile dysfunction stuff. It's a lot of the same stuff. And Modern Age had a physical presence. It's always hard to scale up a physical retail sort of clinic. I think it just ultimately could not gain enough traction to be that VC model, VC-backed model. So they ended up shutting down. So and then, so best comprehensive wearable. Oh yeah, I remember that from the Slack. So I actually, this might be a controversial opinion. I actually think it's the Apple Watch. I'm biased. I'm wearing one. I see Paulus is wearing one. I'll bet a lot of you out there are wearing one. It's the best balanced wearable for what you might need. It measures your sleep, your exercise. It's got a lot of cool things. They even infringed upon a couple of patents to get you some of the best data to your phone. So I think it's the best comprehensive wearable. Depending on your goals, you can get different sort of wearables. Like I know the Whoop is very popular for athletes, Polaris, things like that. The Ultra Human is an up and coming company that a lot of people are watching because they're going to battle it out with companies like Whoop, Aura, and so forth. Aura, of course, is very well known. They have entrenched themselves in the athletic space, but which is interesting because a lot of people don't love Aura for fitness tracking, but they love Aura for sleep tracking. So it's kind of been, posited as the leader in sleep tracking. my question for anybody who's considering wearables is, what is your goal? Because honestly, sometimes you need maybe the gold standard of a measurement once. You don't necessarily need it every single day, all the time. Maybe you just need a good enough solution to help keep you on track or in a direction. I think of it like DEXA scans. I do a DEXA scan, once, you could do one once a year, once every 6 months, once every 3 months. But do you need one every single day? Like, no. And your at-home smart scale is definitely way worse, and it doesn't tell you a lot of information, but it can tell you directionally your body composition. And if you align that enough, sometimes that's good enough for a continuous wearable. So best labs to get. I considered answering that question during this discussion and decided it was going to take an hour. So I'm going to leave that one. I'm actually going to write something about the best labs to get. I think there's an argument to be said that you only need to get a few, like your usual 5 to 10 that most primary care docs would prescribe or order for their patients. And then you have to personalize it if you want to get deep into any one thing. And again, you might want to do a broader panel, more like one time or every so often, depending on how close you want to follow data and so forth. And then, do we need a DEXA scan? And in-body, so in-bodies are very inaccurate and imprecise, and it's a little tough. DEXAs, although they're the gold standard, they're not perfect either. So both of them are very dependent on like the water composition in your body. So if you are measuring yourself having drunk a certain amount of water, like different hydration levels, different levels of food, like even the night before can impact it. You're not going to get a perfect comparison, apples to apples, every single time. In-body just happens to be even less precise. So it kind of just depends on what your goals are. I think because the DEXAs are, in my opinion, affordable enough, they're like in the $150 sort of range here in New York City, then I find that it's a valuable enough test that I do think it's good to get at least, once a year or something like that. But everybody's going to have a different opinion on what is affordable. I literally had a patient who was paying something like $100 a month for rapamycin and did not want to spend $150 for a DEXA scan. People are funny and very strange about what they're willing to spend money on, and it's a very individual discussion. So supplements. Which supplements about breaking the bank? So this is another very hard question to answer because, again, you're going to want to balance what a person's goals are, what a person's needs are, like in every given time. I don't think supplements are a set and forget type of decision, much like you would do most medication prescriptions. You have to see what a person needs at a given point in time, and you just need constant reevaluation. I was kind of joking earlier, but yeah, magnesium is like pretty safe. Fiber is pretty good for most people. You're probably going to get more bang for your buck, like just eating it in the form of things like chia seeds and flax seeds. So there's like a gradient of things that are more food-like and things that are more like pill-like. And there's a very long discussion to be had about how to evaluate for a particular person's goals. And creatine, yes, creatine is pretty cheap, pretty good for most people. I know that, going back to the mastermind, there were a lot of discussions about like, what everybody takes for themselves and what everybody recommends for their patients. Creatine is extremely popular in the longevity space and also the fitness wellness space. Just to quickly rattle off a couple of other ones that came up and were very popular is a lot of people do metformin. A lot of people do some sort of GLP-1 agonist for their patients, compounded versions, oral versions, light doses, ongoing ones. That actually was kind of interesting to me. I was like, wow, like people are just compounding to have light doses of GLP-1 agonists. It's an interesting approach. And a lot of people are prescribing tadalafil to their patients for blood flow purposes, men, women, both. Rapamycin, about half of the entire crowd was prescribing rapamycin and taking it themselves. There's a whole discussion about how to prescribe it because different formulations, whether it's compounded or from particular manufacturers, will have different bioavailability different, even amongst compounded rapamycin, there's different bioavailability because of the fillers that are put in to the compound. So it's a very complicated discussion about people's like longevity stack, even amongst longevity physicians. And I will cover this point since we have already touched on it too. Longevity medicine really is not currently cost effective. So just to get that out there, I agree with everybody who's like, this is ridiculous. Like people are paying so much money. It's not cost effective. Like, let's just be real. Everybody knows Peter Attia's clinic. It's $120,000 a year. That's ludicrous. Like, he's obviously, worth it to the people who pay for that amount because those people have so much money that that's a drop in the, bucket for them. And, I encourage all physicians to recognize that pricing is not ever about, there's no objective value to anything. Money is a fictional myth that we've created to control supply and demand. And so he's got great demand, and so he can charge that amount. It's not, and a different doctor can provide exactly the same services, you could argue, but people are very comfortable with him. He's a great thinker, great educator, and people are very comfortable with him. So people are willing to pay that amount. But I summed up a bunch of other common longevity stack type tools and how much it costs, just to give a quick overview of them all. But you can tell like it starts adding up. It's going to be like thousands of dollars for even a lightweight stack. Even a lot of the lab panels, if you're paying out of pocket, it's going to end up being thousands of dollars if you're doing it pretty regularly. I know people who regularly do monthly lab tests in this world, and it's just totally normal for them. So, and I think the commonality across all of this is, again, a lot of data, continuous data, and having a partner, whether that's the doctor, the fitness expert, the nutritionist, so on and so forth. There's usually like a whole team involved in a longevity concierge type practice who will help you understand all of your data and, guide you towards a super hyper personalized plan. So how this will impact all of us. So I think this is going to impact all of us. You're never going to hear the end of it from your patients, especially in certain locations. Some of you may be spared from all of this longevity hype because some people just don't care. But I do think more and more you're going to see in younger generations, especially distrustful of more conventional, traditional type healthcare and practices, who are kind of tired of sick care, who are tired of their insurance not covering anything. They're going to go more and more towards these brands that are more longevity focused. And I bring up this graph because this is the longevity escape velocity graph. So you'll hear about this, and this might sound insane to a lot of people, but it's not an impossibility that some of us in, maybe in our 30s and 40s, some people in their 50s perhaps, are very hopeful that we will be able to extend our lives enough such that we pass this longevity escape velocity, when every year we live, we will gain more than a year of aging backwards in relevance. And therefore, we could potentially live forever unless we get hit by a truck. So that is the hope and the optimism. And I think another main reason why the startup community is so excited about longevity, because it really hits that nerve of like kind of crazy moonshot thinking that may not work. Like there's like a 1% chance that this is going to turn out to be true, but it's all worth it if that 1% turns out to actually be reality. So I think it's important for all of us to understand this trend that's happening. I don't know how much of it will stick. It's as all things in life, I think it's highly dependent as well on the market, the economy, world events, and so forth. So I'm not going to predict the future. I think it's an exciting trend. I think there's a lot of value to be gained from the approaches of longevity care. And I think we could all benefit from learning a lot more from the practices of longevity physicians. So, all right, I'm gonna pause there Paulius, tell me
Yeah,
questions.
this is great. We have a really lively chat. So thanks, Hillary. I'm gonna call on some people who asked interesting questions to give it a little bit more color. So Emily, you asked a great question about ways to stay cutting edge on longevity medicine. Do you want to
Mhm.
fill in more
Yeah.
details? Or if Emily, I don't know if you're commuting or you can chat, you can add more background to it.
I was just eating. Sorry.
No
Just
worries.
eating
Eating's
and
important.
so uh wasn't on video for that reason. Um I mean I feel like one of the you kind of started out with, some good points about evidence-based medicine and kind of the limits of doing that in as
Mhm.
a doctor in the United States. And one of the limits of longevity medicine, one of the benefits of longevity medicine is it's trying to be ahead of the evidence.
Mhm.
But that's also one of the limits too, in terms of like it's hard to know which evidence is real. And so, besides just doing everything that a TS says,
Mhm. Yeah,
like what is the way to really like stay on top of this field?
of
Because there
course.
is some BS out for sure, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. So one thing I think to recognize is that there's huge diversity in opinion in the field, from very evidence-based, like, I need an RCT before I'm going to do anything, to people who are doing N of one. N of one is another thing that comes up constantly. N of one studies in the longevity space, because I think there's this belief, and I kind of buy into it too, that everyone is so individual, though, and most people are well, so you're not going to do crazy studies on them because it's too variable, too high risk maybe to do things for long, or maybe it just does not make sense. So so from RCT to N of one, there's this diversity of opinion of what is okay, or prime time, okay for prime time, basically. I actually think the reason why a lot of people like Peter Attia, and this is true for me too, is that he actually can speak to a lot of conventional doctors like well enough. Like he sits at, like, if this is like the most evidence-based, to like this is N of one, he's kind of like over here actually. He's like 30%. And along the way, there's a lot of folks who are way more like down here. If you've like gotten deep on Peter Attia, he actually mostly follows evidence-based, pretty reasonable stuff for all of his patients. So I don't have a 100% answer for you, because I am personally inundated with all the information coming in, and there's not great studies for most of the things being recommended, especially since we're getting into the weeds of like nutrition and exercise, and that's so variable. It's so hard to do studies on these things. Like, people get so mad at each other about like the results of nutritional and exercise studies. I'm like, you know what? Like, just, it's fine, like whatever, just eat more whole foods and like not too much, and then like exercise a shit ton, and then you will be fine. Like that's like basically good enough for all of that. It's actually something for that I am working towards, is about like building a bit more education that is easy to access for people in this whole realm, because I think like it's not just patients, it's all of us, like all of us doctors who also, we want to keep up, but it's just insane to look at all of the data coming in. So, no.
Thank you. So, Rashad actually asked a very similar question, but his was more about like standard of care practice in longevity space. I don't even know if that really exists
Yeah, there's
because
not really. So, as a quick highlight, is one project I'm spearheading for the longevity docs community is actually a kind of like an up to date for longevity medicine. And it's like, we'll see how it goes, by the way, because you know how it is trying to get folks to contribute to a database. It's like pulling teeth because doctors are really busy. But everybody has a different protocol for whatever it is they're doing. Like, I'll give you an example. Rapamycin. It's like anybody's best guess, like how to do a rapamycin protocol, because there's not been great there's not been any real studies in humans. So people basically are doing, the most common is weekly rapamycin. The most common dose is 6 milligrams, but really people are trying to up and up, like starting from 1 or 2 milligrams once a week to like increase it until people have intolerable side effects. And that's like a very strange way to dose a medication. So there's some suggestion that maybe we should be like testing labs, maybe we should be doing like more custom, like weight-based dosing or something like that, like for other meds. There's no standardization is what I would say. The only standard across all longevity practices is this focus on health span and the hyper individualization of care.
So this leads actually to Zach's question. Do you want to ask Zach what you've written about how clinics are measuring against each other, which I think health span you just mentioned, Hillary.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've had so many questions that I haven't typed out since having that one, but
Ask any of them. Yeah.
no, I'm gonna stay on topic. So that one is like, you know, it's really easy to get away with like highway robbery in the longevity space because you don't know what really works for longevity until people start dying of age specifically. And so, you know, you have all these interventions going on, and you know, what do clinics say they're improving? You know, are they measuring like epigenetic readouts? Are they looking at like, I mean, I'm sure like, you know, weight and all of that, but ideally you want some sort of health span readout.
Yeah. Speaking of epigenetics, age, I'm sure some people have seen the stuff around biological age calculators. You know, none of them are like perfectly accurate, but they're actually being used. Like the phenotypic age is being used in all sorts of fun settings, like in the ICU to predict mortality. It's been used in pregnant populations. Pregnant women apparently age way freaking faster during pregnancy. Sad news for women all around, always. And like, but then like, so it's like a weird concept, biological age, but that's one method by which you can see if something is working in terms of longevity. But I agree with you that it is selling hope. And I think the vulnerable populations are, you know, it's kind of like similar to the quote unquote alternative medicine space, which I think, you know, we are also hesitant and careful about because you see sort of bad outcomes. I don't think there's a great answer. I think we just have to, my dream is that everybody had better health literacy and critical thinking so that they can defend themselves and advocate for themselves. But, you know, we're their best next shield.
Yeah. Roy, would you want to ask your question about longevity as a marketing tool? Because this also echoes a bit of what Daniel was saying, as you know, what's the incentive for PCPs to learn about longevity?
Yeah, I think it's come up in previous talks that you know, PCP may have a primary care. I mean, may have a branding problem, and if there's special sex appeal to longevity, then you know, maybe if you don't buy into everybody should be on an mTOR inhibitor and one day we'll reach escape velocity and all live forever. At the very least, you know, sex sells, and you can kind of get them in the door and do things that are more evidence-based if you just kind of brand this way.
Yeah. I think it's don't be afraid to lean into, you know, for a good cause, like lean into relatively harmless marketing. And actually, literally the next piece, which I'm hoping to publish very shortly, one of the lines I'm like, yes, like longevity is a marketing phrase, but that doesn't mean it's not good. I mean, marketing is a form of meaning making. You have to give meaning to people. And there's some parts which are like a little bit tougher. Like now folks are looking to their doctors to be kind of celebrities. They want their doctors to be good looking, like muscular and like athletes. And, you know, not all of us have, all of these things, but I think for what it's worth, people are demanding a bit more, which, you know, I think it's overall a good thing. Like people are getting more excited about their own health. And if selling them something that's sexy is the way to do it, I think it's, it's for a good cause.
So we'll just stay on that topic for a little longer because Allison, who couldn't make it live today, she kind of basically is saying, like, what's different about longevity than regular primary care? Is it just that lack of evidence is like the differentiating factor?
Yeah.
Because one could argue just taking care of chronic illness is about longevity. Just if you have more to add, or you feel like everything's been spoken on that already.
Yeah, just quickly saying that I don't think that longevity care and ideal primary care are very different. I think just the realities of primary care in America is so far from it that it means something very different to the common layperson.
Yeah. Okay. I liked a question from Rashad. I'm looking through it. Where was that? Rashad, are you around? And if not, we'll come back to him. Kenneth, are you around?
I like this
Yeah,
moderation.
what's that?
Hey, I know you're probably exercising. Do you want to add
Walking for longevity.
Okay, good. Yeah. So you had this interesting thought. I don't know if it was a longevity thought where about startup incubators and real medicine. Do you want to share? I'm just curious if others will have some reactions to it.
Oh, just by wrote it in the chat. It's like an analogy, right? It kind of feels like a startup incubator where you have all these like ideas that people are excited about, but only like maybe a couple of them will make it out into the real world and be successful. And Hillary, to your point about like that Slack group with the like doctors doing interesting stuff, and then the other people who are kind of like, I don't know. The examples I kind of cited, if you go back, years, I was following Atia back in residency and listening to Dayspring stuff and doing like glycoprotein NMRs, ApoB, LP little a, and like, it's standard of care now in Europe, and it's going to become standard of care. So that's like a startup that like made it, right? It's about to IPO and become a guideline. Meanwhile, like at the same time, they were talking about, using metformin on everybody because for some reason it's like protective to the liver. But then he like reversed it, I think 2 years later. I was like, all right, guys, stop doing this. Bad for you. That's like an idea that didn't make it to IPO. So just a
I like
interesting
that.
thought process, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's fun. Thank you for sharing that because I so agree. Like, and I don't blame Atia or anybody else for changing their minds. Like, there's new data coming out all the time. I think most people would agree that Atia doesn't suggest anything too risky to most people. Like, for example, his views on even rapamycin, which is generally seen as quite safe. He is very careful about like how he educates about it because he doesn't want to sound like he's promoting it because it's pretty early in terms of research. So metformin, yeah, being pro metformin or anti metformin, it's like looking at the evidence is really hard to say like if it means anything. Like he stopped using it because he was like, oh, people are like losing muscle mass or something like that. And then there's other people who are like, well, but the muscle that's left seems to be just as strong or even more efficient. So people are going to argue all day long about specifics, but I think as long as you're generally careful about understanding the evidence both ways for a particular decision, then you can guide an individual patient. So, but I agree. It's kind of like an incubator. We're seeing what wins out long term in the end.
Mario, I believe, asked a question earlier at the beginning about your commentary on people rather than brands. And Mario, are you around to expand on that? Maybe he's not. He might have dropped off. Okay.
Oh, yes, I'm here now.
Oh, hey, Rashad's here.
Rashad. Hey.
Okay, substitute in for Mario. Hey.
Hey, just curious about getting started in longevity medicine. Average roster size, how often are you interacting with your patients? Is this more a daily interaction, both in person and remotely? And then are you screening patients? I'm assuming this is not being something offered to palliative patients or someone who just had a stent for an MI. So just screening your patients roster size and what's the interaction like in terms of cadence and frequency?
Yeah, I missed a bunch of that, but I'm gonna try to answer it, and please like jump in if I didn't answer part of it. So like how to get started with being a longevity physician is, I think, the gist of the question. And I think it's really, I don't think there's a playbook is the answer. I think the first step, and I thought about this too for myself. So, you know, for the context, I'm a very, very part-time practicing clinician at this point. I spend a day and a half a week practicing only through telemedicine. And I would frame like the way I practice as primary care with a hint of longevity medicine. And it's mostly out of practicality because I think to hang up your shingle and be a longevity physician, I mean, it's not extraordinarily hard to do, but I think it is like you have to redefine a bit like what you do. I think there's still a bit of a narrative storytelling problem. So I kind of decided to do that just out of ease. We'll see what happens in the future. But in terms of how often you see their patients, I think that's more of a decision to be made between, well, for yourself and also for the patient, because you could argue that someone who is very adamant about achieving optimal health span might want to talk to their doctor like every week. And, you know, but you should set boundaries and obviously not, and, or maybe upcharge for people who really want access to you. Similar, I think that's more of a question of how concierge you want your practice to be more than like any required, you know, set interval for how often you see or test patients.
And the last part, thank you for that. Last part was, are you screening patients in terms of, is this being offered to cancer patients, palliative patients? If so, what's the screening criteria?
Yeah. Screening patients who like, and then you mean like if they have cancer or something like that, like
Yes,
maybe.
would you offer it to someone who has cancer
Yeah,
or who's
so
palliative?
it's actually really, really interesting you bring that up because actually one of the projects I'm working on with a former classmate who is a palliative care physician is around this sort of longevity approach for cancer patients. And it seems contradictory because cancer is obviously a life-threatening condition, but I think it's very akin to integrative health. It's like treating the person as a human and for their goals. And when you think about it, you are also trying to increase their health span more than, you know, necessarily the length of life. You don't want them to be sick in the hospital. So it's an interesting idea, and I get that it doesn't fit the marketing quite as well, but I think there's going to end up being subspecialties of longevity medicine, just as there are in regular medicine.
So this is awesome. I have, oh, Daniel is dropping off, but he had some good takes. We will obviously can continue any of the interesting questions on Slack. I think I definitely did not call on everybody, but does anyone have I think Michael O'Brien, you always have some interesting things to contribute. I know you wrote some things, and do you have any question for Hillary?
Oh, hey, thanks. I was just typing in the chat, and I'll just say a comment. So I've done a lot of palliative care and hospice work. So there's good data that hospice and palliative approach in terminally ill patients actually increases their longevity. There's actually a ton of data on this. So if you enroll in a hospice program and you were a terminal cancer patient versus conventional care, you increase your lifespan by 3 to 4 months on average. So
Absolutely.
interesting little take. I think very, very different approach than what we're talking about. But the question I put in the chat, which is kind of like a controversial question, but I think it does. There's like this societal trend that is this a is this just a secular society that's lost religion and it's looking to replace the things religion used to do for us? So the quotes that I put in there is like, you know, if I'm a good person, I can live forever. Like that was the theme of most major religions for most of human society. Or the high priest will look at the ruins and look at these magical symbols that I don't understand, but they do. And they're going to tell me what it says. It tells me my fortune, which is like my blood work for all these like esoteric labs that nobody has really good evidence on. Or is it, you know, this purity contest? If I eat a pure kosher diet or a pure vegan diet or a pure or whatever pure diet, the gods will look good upon me and I will live forever. Right? Like, is it like a weird cultural phenomenon that's feeding some of this?
Yeah. You know, I fully admit I've not thought about it that way, but now that you mention it, I see a lot of parallels. I was thinking about it almost more as, you know, I was framing it as like an ego thing. Like I think a lot of doctors in this this world are pretty maybe egocentric, and for better or worse. I think maybe you have to be sometimes to do something out of the box. And I agree with you that many patients are seeking guidance, but they're also demanding more a bit. So they want to put their longevity docs on a pedestal, but they want them to earn it, and they also want to work hard towards something, but know that the work that they're putting in is actually worthwhile. So yeah, I don't think that's I actually think it's a very interesting analogy. No, or thought.
Yeah, and you know, there's some talk about this in the fitness. I think I was listening to some podcast from the guy who founded Peloton, and
Mhm.
he literally talked about how they went to churches and like studied what they do at churches and tried to recreate that in Peloton classes.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
like the intensity of like a gospel church and the music and the like the way that they speak and the encouraging calling people out and you
Yeah.
know so
Yeah.
yeah, I'm just curious, like it's just a, I don't know, that's probably more for marketing
I
sociology.
know. Yeah. And I kind of I never want to offend anybody who's like deeply religious, but I do think, you know, many religions back in the day were the original movement, like institutions, right? So they succeeded. They were very good at all of these marketing sales tactics. And so there is something to be learned from all of that.
I would like to call on Matt if he's able to chat, if he has any reflections, because he's another smart cookie here. But he might be
I love
walking.
smart cooking.
Yeah, and it's
Doing some of the dog walks. No, I mean no specific ones. I came into this very uneducated, so I'm kind of just taking it all in. So yeah, appreciate Hillary, you sharing all the
You too.
knowledge.
Mhm.
No, no hot takes, which is a rarity. So Hillary, good job in stunning
Oh
me
my
into silence.
goodness. Well, maybe it helps that I honestly came into this field as a skeptic myself. So like maybe that's the reason. Like, I'm one of you guys. I also think there's a little bit of madness in this all, but I think there's a lot of good to come out of it.
Yeah. So, you know, I actually would say maybe one interesting poll to do is, and I don't know if, you know, how like for those who've learned about longevity, has your opinion been changed? Because it sounds like, Hillary, you somewhat have, you know, were a skeptic, but you leaned into it, right? Because you see something that maybe others aren't seeing. Curious, like if others either want to type out that, you know, they're continuing to be skeptical, or like what would it take for you to change your mind, I guess? Is it just more evidence? And Michael, I think, asked an interesting question. Michael.
Oh, it was just, yeah, going back, Hillary, how did you come out of your skepticism? What was it that flipped that switch for you?
You know, so even farther context is that when I was even younger, like before I became a physician myself, I was fascinated with the concept of longevity. And that was back in the day when there was just Aubrey de Grey. If anyone remembers him, he's kind of a interesting character. He's the man with the long beard, if anyone is familiar. And that was all there was. I actually gave a residency talk. My senior talk was about cryopreservation. And my program director was like so confused. I think he literally scoffed like out loud, like at my senior talk. So this is a topic that has fascinated me because at some core of me, I've always like had this suspicion, well, we're probably not going to make it there to, quote unquote immortality in any of our lifetimes, but there's something about life and death that's been fascinating to me. Maybe that's why my prior venture was in the psychedelic world. I was like looking at that bridge between consciousness, unconsciousness. And yet I'm not a super religious person. And so I've come full circle in that I've very much accepted, the world, health, life, death as what they are. And I'm very comfortable with that now. And it's so funny that now the world is seemingly obsessed with longevity. But the reason why I was originally skeptical about the field is it is overwhelmingly a bunch of guys, for lack of a better word, a bunch of tech bros, a lot of dudes starting companies in this space. And as a female Asian physician, obviously I stick out a bit as quite different. So I wasn't totally into it. But then I was like, you know what? By the way, my partner, my romantic partner is a white male. So sometimes I'm like, you can't let that stop you from trying to understand a field more deeply. And the more I learned about it, I felt like we're getting to a point where the medicine is catching up to the hope a bit. I don't know if it's going to be in our lifetime that we're going to make significant strides into true regenerative, senolytic, geroprotective or reversal type care, like where we are, quote unquote, slowing aging down or reversing it in some sense. But I do think we are at a point where we have real tools, and it's going to be beyond like, I think, what everyone's saying about like good diet, exercise, etc. It's true. That's going to be 90% of it today, but it's that extra 10% that defines longevity medicine and differentiates it as perhaps like really good primary care. And that 10% is growing more and more concrete and real. And that's like what's really intriguing the more I look into it.
This is a wonderful way to wrap up our hour. My ask as always, please turn on your camera. I'm gonna be the photographer. And then I'm gonna stop the recording and then we can, hang out for a more spicy convo after.